Good morning, everyone. So good to see you. As Wes said, my name is Taylor. If we haven't gotten to meet yet, I'm so grateful that you're here, that you took time out of your weekend to be with us, or if you're watching online. If we haven't met yet, here's a fun fact about me. Those of you that have been around a while, you know this, and you're going to groan and boo, and it's fine. I'm a big Philadelphia Eagles fan. Whoa, I got some cheers this time. Us Philadelphia people are not used to cheering, so just some grace for us. So I'm a big Eagles fan, and we had a big game last Sunday against the arch nemesis Dallas Cowboys. Now, here's what's fun about being on staff at Grace Church. There are some Cowboy fans on staff too. I know, only by God's grace do we work together. But last week was a blast because it was a big game, tight game. Eagles won, and so it's been a fun week of roasting each other back and forth a little bit. And unbeknownst to me, I wasn't the only one in my household getting in on the Eagles fandom action. My daughter Gemma also was picking up on some things. So, the big game's on Sunday, we beat the Cowboys, and then she has school the next day on Monday. And she's in VPK here at Small Wonders, our Monday through Friday preschool. And the letter for the week was J. They go A, B, C, D, all the way through the alphabet, letter J. And each week they give her an assignment where she has to trace the letters, and then she gets to draw a picture of whatever she wants to that starts with the letter. And so imagine my surprise when I open up Gemma's folder on Tuesday after getting her Monday assignment back, and it's this. She drew Jalen Hurts, the quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles, was her J drawing. I had two thoughts looking at this. One was, train a child up in the way they should go, and they shall not depart from it. And the other one was, oh no, what have I done? I'm still not sure which one it's going to be, but that's okay. I didn't coerce her to do this. She just did it on her own. I've never been more scared and proud in one moment as a dad. So here's what I noticed, though. Here's what I was thinking about as I'm watching Gemma become an Eagles fan, and I'm watching this game, and it's a big deal. I had this random thought come through my head, and it's this. There's a big difference between being a spectator and being a participant. So if I could have gone on that field on Sunday and tried to will them to win, I would have done it. But guess what? I'm just some overweight guy in my living room cheering them on. I'm not doing anything, right? I'm just merely a spectator. I'm not a participant on the field with them. And that's not just true for football, because this is true, right? We got a spectator, I'm just watching the game, participants in the game. I'm in the stands, they're in the middle of the arena, in the middle of the field. This is true for life in general and for our faith in general specifically too. See, when we talk about our faith, we have a choice. We can be a spectator, kind of watch at a distance, kind of seeing, hoping something happens. Or we can be an active participant, partnering with God in the work and purpose that He's called us to here on this earth. We have a choice. And as set-apart followers of Jesus, our choice has to be being a participant in what God is doing in and through us. Amen? It's not enough to be set apart and be a spectator, watching and hoping and kind of seeing what God could do. It's partnering with God to go, God, I am here. Use me and the life that I have to do your will and your purpose. We have a choice, though, as followers of Jesus, in what we choose. We can choose to be spectators, or we can choose to be participants. And so for the past few weeks, we've been talking about what it looks like to be set apart or participants in this purpose that God has for you and for me. We learned a couple weeks ago that by love, followers of Jesus are set apart to love. We learned that it's God's great love for us that gives us this greater purpose, greater calling, for us to then be set apart to love other people. And then last week, Pastor Wes had an amazing sermon that talked about this, that set apart followers of Jesus cross boundaries to share common good. We talked about the woman at the well, and how Jesus crossed all sorts of boundaries to deliver her living water. And so today, we're going to continue on looking at our anchor text from Matthew 25, which are red letter words of Jesus. This is a teaching that Jesus gave to his disciples, talking about a final judgment that's going to happen when he returns to earth. And in this final judgment, there's going to be a separation of people, the sheep and the goats. And Jesus describes the sheep, and the sheep are who we want to be. Just as a reminder, we're going to look at this anchor text one more time. Jesus said, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?' Then the king will reply," read the rest with me, ready, set, go. "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me." So last week, we zoomed in specifically on bringing water to the thirsty. And this week, here's what we're going to zoom in on today. We're going to zoom in on, "I was a stranger and you invited me in." Now, even reading those words, "I was a stranger and you invited me in," the thought of inviting in a stranger can make some of us feel a little more uneasy than we were last week. And I think there's a couple reasons, because there's something about the word stranger that kind of throws us off. And I think there's a couple reasons for this. The first is this, that we have a history of literally not doing the thing that Jesus tells us to do when it comes to this. I mean, just think about it for a second. From a very young age, your parents drilled into your head, don't talk to who? Strangers. Don't talk to strangers. Just don't do it. And there's good reason for that. Hear me. I'm not advocating we throw caution to the wind and let our kids talk to whoever, whenever, all the time. That's not what I'm saying. But we do have to understand that those messages, when they're drilled into us like that, sometimes they stick. And what can happen is that sometimes in today's world, even though we don't need the monitoring of our parents anymore when it comes to strangers, we have this equivalence in our head that goes, stranger equals a threat to safety. I don't feel safe when I'm getting to know a stranger. I don't feel safe. It doesn't feel normal. It doesn't feel right. There's another cause for this too, not just history, but also our personality. You know, some of us are extroverts and introverts. My extroverts, where are you at in the room? Where are you at, extroverts? Where are you? Oh, make some noise. I thought you were going to make some noise. There you are. Yeah, you love this stuff. Introverts, I want to invite you to stand. Just kidding. You would hate that. You would hate that. Don't do that. But we're wired differently, right? Extroverts, we get energy from like conversation and stuff with people. I'm a wired extrovert, so I love you guys. I love you introverts too, but I know I drain you. I exhaust you. See, introverts, like Pastor Wes and I are different too. Pastor Wes is a wired introvert. So I know Pastor Wes has a little bit of time where we can like hang out and talk, and then he needs to go recharge for 12 hours. I get it. I totally get it. But sometimes we let our personality kind of write us off from this stuff and go, well, I'll leave that to the extroverts. I'm not wired that way. And what happens is this idea of inviting strangers in, it pokes not just at our safety, it pokes at our comfort too. We just don't feel comfortable doing that. And I just want to remind us, as followers of Jesus who are set apart, we have a responsibility to relearn a new way to live. That regardless of our history or our personality, we have a call to welcome the stranger in, even if it pokes at our safety and our comfort. Hear me, we should value safety and comfort. We should value that for us and for our families. But there's a line that we cross when it becomes unhealthy in how we overindulge in safety and comfort. I think that's one of the things that I see nowadays. It's like this overindulgence of safety and comfort. And we let safety and comfort be the driving force of what we do and why we do it, instead of God's calling on our life be that. It's kind of like chocolate, right? It's okay to eat a few M&Ms, but eating the whole family size bag is not okay. Oh no, I know, breaking news to some of us. I know, feeling convicted myself, you know. In fact, Jesus, early on in his ministry, Jesus talked to his followers and let them know that following him came with a cost. Here's the Message paraphrase of this conversation Jesus has. He says, when Jesus saw that a curious crowd was growing by the minute, he told his disciples to get him out of there to the other side of the lake. As they left, a religion scholar asked if he could go along. I'll go with you wherever, he said. Jesus was curt. Are you ready to rough it? We're not staying in the best inns, you know. Another follower said, Master, excuse me for a couple days, please. I have my father's funeral to take care of. Jesus what? Refused. First things first. Your business is life, not death. Follow me, and what are the last two words? Pursue life. See, on this mission that we have, this purpose we have, it's all about pursuing life. Not just pursuing life renewed for us, but life renewed for others too. That is the mission we are on, is to pursue life. But guess what? Just as Jesus says, this mission of pursuing life, it comes with a cost. There's a cost to following Jesus. And if you had to ask me, like, what's the cost in today's world? Because it looks a little different than it might have looked back then. Here's what I think the cost in today's world is. The cost comes in an overindulgence of safety and comfort. Nowadays, more than any other, think of all the technology features, security features, wealth we can accumulate. It's pretty easy to feel like we're secure and safe, isn't it? And it's easy to be comfortable these days, right? We don't have to leave our house for pretty much anything anymore. Have you thought about that? Anything. But as followers of Jesus, it comes at a cost. And I think the cost is stepping outside of our perceived overindulgence of safety and stepping outside our perceived overindulgence of comfort. And it starts by welcoming the stranger. So Jesus shows us what this looks like in a pretty incredible way. There's a story of an encounter that he has with someone that's going to give us some context for what this looks like today. This encounter happens with a man named Zacchaeus. And oftentimes when a new character is introduced into Scripture, we have to do some digging to try to figure out who this person is, do some contextual work of like, well, what are they about? Who are they? What are some descriptors they have? And what we see in the Gospel of Luke is that it actually is explained pretty well who Zacchaeus is and what he's all about. So look at this with me. This is the beginning of Luke 19. It says, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was pay attention to this, chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, and he's also short, FYI, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. So did you catch the descriptors of who Zacchaeus was? He was a chief tax collector and wealthy. Now in today's world, that would be a pretty good set of circumstances, you would think, right? Pretty positive. I mean, having chief in front of anything is pretty good. Like even if you're like chief janitor, you're at least the chief janitor, right? But back then, this idea of being a chief tax collector and wealthy, when it's written in there, it's implied a very negative connotation. What the author is implying here is that Zacchaeus gained his wealth by extorting money from fellow Jews. That he would go around and he would take above and beyond what was required to pay, and he would pocket it for himself. And so Zacchaeus gained his wealth by stealing money from others. That is not good. And what's fascinating is to compare Zacchaeus with the person we talked about a lot last week, the woman at the well. Both of them had an encounter with Jesus. Both of them seemingly are on polar opposites of life. But yet they both had something in common. So think about the boundaries we talked about last week, right? Of gender and social and religious. Those who are looking at these two people, the woman at the well and Zacchaeus, they would say, according to the world back then, that Zacchaeus was on the right side of all those boundaries. He was a man, he had wealth, he was a Jew. I mean, he had everything going for him, right? The woman at the well didn't. On the outside, these two look like polar opposites. But what's fascinating is on the inside, here's what they had in common. They both still had something missing. Something was missing for both of them. For the woman at the well, she was missing living water. For Zacchaeus, I would say, he was missing a friend. Zacchaeus had this reputation that preceded him in all the wrong ways. It was one of those, have you ever had a moment where you've been in a crowd but you felt alone? You felt like nobody knew you. You didn't have a friend, didn't have someone in your corner. That's probably what Zacchaeus experienced. Because after all, who would want to eat dinner with the guy that was stealing money from you? Nobody. And Zacchaeus, while he was known by others, he really felt like a stranger. Not many people were to be in his corner at that time. But yet Jesus was there providing the very thing that he needed. And so we see that he climbs up this tree. Now, we don't know what drove him up into the tree. It could have been he knew his inner need for a friend. It could have been that he was told by somebody else that this guy Jesus was coming and he needed to hear this guy. It could have been because he was short and he just needed to see. I'm going to let the text speak when I tell you Zacchaeus was short and couldn't see over the crowd. But something drove him to do something out of the ordinary and climb up a tree to see Jesus. See, on the outside, it looked like not much would have been wrong with Zacchaeus, but on the inside, something was. There's a lesson here for us too, friends. I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to look at somebody else who looks, better off than I do and write them off as they don't have any needs. Life's good. Like, I'm struggling, but they're fine. Desperation knows no boundaries. Brokenness knows no barriers. Where it doesn't matter what we look like on the outside, we all can share a common struggle and pain and brokenness that happens on the inside of each and every one of us. So don't write somebody off. Even if they're faking it really well and seem like nothing's going on, nothing's wrong, know that there's something in them that is crying out. And I think they're crying out for a relationship with Jesus above all else. So here's Zacchaeus. We could say somewhat desperate, somewhat alone. He's in this tree and he's looking for Jesus, and here's what happens. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." So notice there's two specific actions that Jesus does here with Zacchaeus. Two specific things. The first thing he does is he sees him. The second thing he does, he calls him by name. Let's talk about these for a second. The very first thing Jesus does is he sees Zacchaeus. Jesus is walking, there's crowds everywhere. He looks up and he sees a short guy in a tree. That would catch my eye too. So Jesus looks up and he makes eye contact with Zacchaeus. I want you to just think about that moment for Zacchaeus. Like, imagine if you were in his shoes, right? In this tree, heard about this guy Jesus possibly, at least enough to know that he means something because there's a bunch of people there to see him. There's crowds everywhere. And he makes eye contact with you. There's this moment, right, where I'm sure Zacchaeus, if I were him, I would have held my breath to be like, what's going to come out of his mouth next? Is he going to say anything? Is he going to walk on by? Is he too good for me, too important for me? And then what does Jesus do? He doesn't just see him, but he calls him by name. He says, "Zacchaeus, come down from that tree." He doesn't say, "Hey, tax collector." He doesn't say, "Hey, jerk, come down from that tree. Hey, thief, come down from that tree." He says, "Zacchaeus, come down from the tree." Here's what happens in this exchange. When Jesus sees him and calls him by name, Jesus made Zacchaeus feel seen and known. That's what happened. What did he do? He made Zacchaeus feel seen. Probably during a time where a lot of other people looked at him with scorn. I mean, we're going to get to the crowd in a second, but you heard what the crowd thought of him, right? Why would he go to be the guest of a sinner? Jesus sees him. And what does Jesus do? He calls him by his name and makes him feel known. Has that ever happened to you? Can you think of a time where you felt seen and known before? Whether it's by God or by somebody else? It's an amazing feeling, isn't it? My wife, Elisa, she is a 6th grade science teacher. And a few years ago when she was going to interview for the job, she walked into the interview with the principal and the other admin. And the principal said, "Hey, Alyssa, so nice to meet you." It happens all the time with the way my wife's name is spelled. And so Elisa real quick goes, "Oh, my name's Elisa, but it's okay. Everyone gets it wrong. It's fine." And the principal cut her off. And the principal said, "It's not okay. Your name is Elisa, and that's who you are. I'm going to make sure I remember that, and I'm going to make sure my staff knows that too. And from that moment on, at least at the time, didn't even know she was going to get the job. This was the beginning of the interview. She had this moment where she said, I want to work for her because she gets it. She gets the power of a name and how it makes people feel seen and known. Friends, our role to be like Jesus is to help people feel seen and help them feel known. That they're no longer a stranger in the crowd, but they're known by you and by God. But Jesus, he doesn't just stop there. He doesn't just stop at making Zacchaeus feel seen and making him feel known. He takes it a step further and he says, I must come over to your house today. That word must in the Greek, it means necessary and inevitable. It kind of has the tone of like, hey, Zacchaeus, I'm coming over whether you like it or not. I'm coming over. And Zacchaeus, we see he climbs down the tree and he welcomes Jesus gladly. And back then, when you would go over to someone's house for dinner, it was a sign of acceptance. It was accepting the relationship. That's why the crowd responds the way they do. So when Jesus says, I'm coming to your house to eat, the crowd goes, what is he doing making himself a guest of that sinner? Because in their mind, the actions of Zacchaeus did not warrant the acceptance of a relationship from Jesus. But in that moment, Jesus redefines what it looks like to welcome the stranger. He redefines relationship to go, it's not just about are your actions worthy of a relationship? It becomes my grace is worthy of seeing you and knowing you. Jesus redefined relationship in that moment. And what did it lead to? It led to life transformation for Zacchaeus. While eating dinner, there's this moment where Zacchaeus says that he's going to pay back everyone that he stole from, not just the equal amount, but 4 times the amount that he took from them. This guy who was extorting people in the morning has now turned to being generous with his money in the evening, all over a dinner and an encounter with Jesus. His life was transformed. Here's what Jesus says to cap off the story. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Salvation has come to this home today. What does that word salvation mean? Here's what it means. It means deliverance, wholeness. It means to deliver out of destruction into his what? Safety. Think how many times Zacchaeus would define safety as wealth, financial security. But today he had a new definition of it. He found safety in a relationship with Jesus, being seen and known by him. So much so that his safety was no longer in his wealth, which he was going to give back 4 times the amount to people that he had taken from. I want you to capture this, because when Jesus says salvation has come to this home today, he doesn't just mean that Zacchaeus will now go to heaven. Yay. No, it's bigger than that. Yes, there's deliverance, there's the forgiveness of sins, there's eternity with God, but there is a wholeness that came to that home today. Zacchaeus was made whole now. He wasn't made whole to be put on ice so that when he dies and goes to heaven, everything's good. There was a wholeness that happened to Zacchaeus so he would be a transforming vessel of God's grace now and forever. That's what salvation is. I hope you don't miss that. It's not about punching a ticket so you can get to heaven and calling it a day. It's about deliverance for them, but also complete wholeness in your life right now. If you're here and you're missing something, if you feel like Zacchaeus, salvation can come to your home today. Because here's what the story of Zacchaeus shows us. It shows us this, that Jesus meets me where I am so I can meet others where they are. Would you say that with me? Ready, set, go. Jesus meets me where I am so I can meet others where they are. So that's the beautiful thing that Jesus did for Zacchaeus. He met him in a fig tree. Maybe you find yourself today in your own kind of sycamore fig tree. You don't know why you got there. You don't know how you're there, but something drove you to look for Jesus today. And if that's you, if maybe you're not quite sure about your relationship with God, not sure about your journey of faith, I want to invite you to look at the first part of this statement, that Jesus meets me where I am. If you find yourself in a sycamore fig tree today, and you're looking, you've heard about this guy, you're curious about who he is, you're here today or you're listening today because you know there's an inner need in your life that's missing, a hole in your heart that you can't seem to fill, a craving that you can't satisfy, I'm here to tell you that it starts and ends with Jesus. And that he meets you right here where you are right now. That he sees you. And he doesn't meet you with criticism or shame or scorn. He sees you and he knows you and he loves you. If that's you, I would love to pray with you after service and talk with you about what life's been like and how I can help you with your next step. Because maybe for you, your response today needs to be the response of Zacchaeus, where you climb down from your fig tree and you welcome Jesus gladly. But others of us here, we're not in that group. We're in another group. We've been following Jesus for a little bit. We know that he meets us. We're grateful that he meets us. But we need to look at the second half of this statement, which is this. Jesus meets me where I'm at so I can meet others where they are. What does it look like in today's world to welcome the stranger, to invite them in, to do what Jesus did for Zacchaeus? I want to suggest three things that we can do, three things from the story of Zacchaeus and the example of Jesus that we can do. The first is this. I can learn someone's name even if I don't see the need. When you think of the dividing line, like one big dividing line between a stranger and a friend, I think it's learning someone's name is like step one. Because think about it. For strangers, you don't know their name. And for friends, you absolutely do know their name and a whole lot more. But yet, as I was thinking about my own life, taking inventory of my own life, maybe you would agree with this. There's a lot of people I see regularly that I don't know their name. There's the cashier at the grocery store and retail workers and restaurant staff and baristas and co-workers and even, church members that you sit next to every week where we don't know their name. And I was thinking about this, why is that? And I came up with this. Here's why I think this is. Because it's urgency that causes us to learn a stranger's name. When we have to, when we feel like we need to, when it's urgent, when it's pressing, then we learn a stranger's name. I mean, if you need evidence of this, go back with me a year ago to the hurricane. You took time then to learn your neighbors' names, didn't you? I don't know about you, but in those days before and after the storm, I talked to my neighbors more then than I've talked to them for the rest of this year combined. And I challenge myself and convict myself with this because that's a problem. And I need to get outside of my own comfort of my own home to talk to people that are right there in my neighborhood, feet away from my house. But my problem is I don't see an urgent reason to do it. I want to invite you to follow the example of Jesus because here's what happened. The urgency wasn't on Zacchaeus' end. The urgency was on Jesus' end. I have to go to his house. Friends, you might not see a need to learn your neighbor's name, to learn a coworker's name, to learn that church member sitting next to you's name. You might not see a need, but it's surely urgent. It's absolutely urgent. What can you do to learn one name? Don't give me the excuse, well, I'm not good with names. Yeah, I'm not either. But we still need to. We still need to. Just as much as history and personality is not an excuse for us to not do this, we can learn at least one name this week. Amen? Make that your challenge. Here's the second thing. I can accept the relationship even if I don't fully agree with the person. I heard a groan over here. One of the things that Jesus did beautifully is he redefined what relationships look like to where a relationship doesn't have to come with full 100% ideological agreement. Jesus made relationships a little more complex than that. And we see this over and over again. With Zacchaeus, he did not agree with the fact that he was extorting money from other people, yet he accepted the relationship with him. For the woman at the well, he did not agree with many of her views on life, but he accepted the relationship with her and invited to give her living water. Even think about Judas for a moment with me. You know, Judas was there getting his feet washed at the Last Supper. And Jesus accepted the relationship with Judas until Judas reached a point where he said, I can't do this anymore, and betrayed him. Full agreement does not have to be there for us to have a relationship with others. And if we're not careful with this, here's what's going to happen. We're going to automatically limit ourselves to building relationships with people that act like us, think like us, look like us, and talk like us. And as you think about the people you're in relationship with, I want to invite you to be honest with yourself and look at that. If that's the case, if they just act, think, talk, and look like you might need to widen your circle of people that you're building a relationship with. It might mean building a relationship with someone who doesn't vote like you, building a relationship with someone that has a different view of God than you do. Because full agreement does not have to be present for us to accept relationship. I believe it was written that for while we were still sinners, Christ died for you. The very core difference of sin and death, Christ died for us to give us life. That was definitely not in full agreement, but I'm sure glad Jesus accepted the relationship, aren't you? Here's a question I want to give to you as you examine your circle, examine the people that you're in relationship with. It's this: can I leave enough room in relationships that grace can fill the gap when we don't fully align on truth? Can you leave enough room for grace to be there when the current truth you hold with someone else doesn't fully align? Third thing, I can play a role even if I don't see the final result. What's neat about Zacchaeus' story is that we kind of see how it ends, right? We see that he has this life-changing encounter with Jesus. Salvation's come to this home today. It's a happily ever after ending. But what I often think about is the people in Zacchaeus' life that were there before he encountered Jesus that maybe weren't in the home that day, that didn't get to see the final result. Like, was there someone who showed Zacchaeus love when he was unlovable? Was there someone who told him about this guy named Jesus who's in town that he needs to go see? I think about all those people that played a role but didn't get to see the final result. And the same is true for us today. When it comes to welcoming the stranger, we put this weird pressure on ourselves sometimes that we have to be the one to deliver the final result. That it's got to be because of us that they have a life-changing relationship with Jesus. And you might be there for that moment. You might not be. But it doesn't mean that you didn't play a vital role in them experiencing that. Don't give up on the relationship. Don't diminish what you're currently doing in the relationship to show them Jesus. I want to remind us, we follow the example of Jesus, but we are not Jesus. We are not God. We cannot transform someone's life. We can only point people to the one that can. And so the win in your relationship, it might be you got to share your story about God's faithfulness in your life with somebody else. The win might be that you got to have a conversation about God and where what you believe and kind of what they believe. You're playing a vital role even if you don't see the final result. But don't give up. Don't diminish your role. Don't doubt what you're doing. Play the role that God has for you in that moment right then. And leave the final result to Him and His calling. If it's you, that's incredible. If it's not, that's okay too. So when I think of this for my life, I think about how I want to do just that. I want to play a role I want to leave the results up to him. And the role I want to play is just constantly pointing people to Jesus and welcoming the strangers by doing that. And for me, that includes the people outside of my home and also inside my home. Spiritual author Henry Nouwen has this incredible quote where he talks about children. He actually says that children are strangers whom we have to get to know and love, which is fascinating to think about, right? And for those of us on different journeys of parenting, that we hear that differently. But I think about my children, Gemma and Tatum. And at the end of the day, yeah, okay, I want Gemma to be an Eagles fan. Definitely not a Cowboys fan, but I want her to be an Eagles fan. But above all else, what do I want her to be? I want her to be a follower of Jesus. I want her to be a participant, not a spectator when it comes to her faith and calling that God's given on her life. And I know what that means is that I have to be a participant too. Because she's watching me. And the truth of the matter is, friends, that there are other people, the people in your life, people at your work, at the restaurants you go to, the coffee shop you go to, there are people that are watching you too. Waiting to see what you do and how you invite them in to a relationship with Jesus. So would you know today that Jesus meets you where you are? And as set-apart followers of Jesus, would you go and meet other people where they are, even if they're strangers? Let's stand for prayer. God, we thank you for the story of Zacchaeus, the example that it gives to us. Lord, some of us, we might find ourselves in Zacchaeus' shoes, in the same situation, where life on the outside would look okay, but on the inside we're struggling. Lord, would you help us to have the same response as Zacchaeus today, to climb down from the tree and welcome you gladly. God, for those of us that need challenged and convicted, I know like myself this morning, would you help us to welcome the stranger by learning a new name, by leaving room for grace in relationships, and Lord, by giving us humility to play a role and not be worried about the final result. God, we humble ourselves and we look to you now. Would you grow us, challenge us, convict us, reveal something to us as far as our next step and what it needs to be. God, we look to you now. We thank you that you meet us here, and that you call us to meet others. It's in your name we pray. Amen. So we're going to sing one more song today. I want to invite you, this altar is open. If you'd like to come up here and kneel and pray, you can do that, and you can lift a hand, and someone will be happy to pray with you. You can also make your seat a place of prayer as we sing. So let's worship together and let's pray together.